Okay, so recording's on, and we should go. So hello, everybody. Thank you ever so much for turning up. Nice to see you all. Tonight we got Roger and Jane talking about work they did in a region, which I don't know if we're allowed to say which region it is, but on the transport sector. And I read their paper a few months ago, and there's a lovely phrase in it saying that what they were trying to do was to make everybody both dancer and choreographer. And I just thought that was a really lovely way to express the sort of things that we're all trying to do with systems. So I'll hand over to Roger and Jane, whichever one of you wants to start. And,
Thank you.
And there you go.
Yes, I'll start. We're doing a double act. Me, then Jane, then me. Lovely to see some faces that I know and some new faces. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope we can give you an enjoyable ride. John, we've got nominally an hour and a half, have we? So sort of an hour for presentation and half an hour for discussion. Is that right?
Yeah, we normally try and make it a bit more discussion, but if it takes an hour, it takes an hour.
Oh, fine. Oh, well, we can do that. So sort of 45 minutes.
Yeah, 45
well,
minutes.
I say we can. Can we, James? Maybe not now, actually.
Well,
no, you're panicking.
I'll see how you get on.
I'll rush through my superficial bit and then we'll get I'll frame it and then Jane will do the real stuff. Right, super. So hopefully we should be able to share this. Everybody see that?
Yeah, that's good. You there?
Super, great. So given this audience, you will recognize Designing Freedom. This is unapologetically taken from Stafford's book. Both Jane and I have been strongly influenced by Stafford's thinking and work over the years. And I was then, while we were doing this work, I was reading a book by Matthew Barzun called The Power of Giving Away Power. And he has a little chapter which reminds people that concept of freedom should never be thought of as being an individualistic thing. We can only be free together. So we concatenated this to create Designing Freedom Together, which I think really does capture the spirit of what we were trying to do in this work, working collaboratively with as many people as was appropriate and as we could get involved in the work to prototype an approach to design which holds the potential for transformation. So I think there's a transformative thread through everything that we're going to be talking about here, and we've subtitled this a systemic approach in practice. So it was very much in an organization that I was working for at the time, and we'll talk about that in more detail as we go. And Jane joined in a consultancy capacity to provide expert advice, guidance, working on, she and I have been working on this kind of stuff for 10 years or so, and Jane's got, I don't know, 30, 35 years of working with these particular approaches. Yeah, and it was just lovely to be able to do it in practice in quite a meaty context. So there's lots and lots of people out there fixing things out of context. And what we see this work as a practical contribution to creating paths to vitality and with others, so collaboratively. I have no idea how this is going to land with you. Your thoughts may be in other places, your feelings may be in other places, and that's fine, but hopefully things are being sparked here. I've been personally strongly influenced by Nora Bateson's work. She talks about mutual learning. She talks about boundaries as being interfaces of mutual learning. And the thing about mutual learning is that we're learning together, but we're not necessarily learning the same things. So it's fine for you to be learning whatever you're learning as we go along. And if we can have a good chunk of discussion at the end, that would be great. So the overall approach, just a few words about that. It's participative. And it's very much about visioning, about thinking, what would we like to be happening? What needs to be happening? And how would we like things to be? And then a design approach that links to that. Jane said, when we were talking about this the other day, she said, the thing is, we've just got to stop designing the life out of the system. So we did our best to design life back into the system here with the other people we were working with. I really like that as an idea. Focus was the potential for transformation rather than just efficiency improvement. So this was in the context of an organization facing, the normal constraints on funding and etc. But we were holding that space for deep change, and to do that, place citizens, people living their lives in the richness of their context at the middle of the modeling that we were doing. Absolutely was not an analysis of an existing system. It was designing for a desired system in the richness of its context. Now, Jane and I both have a sense, maybe in somewhat different ways, but there's a fair degree of convergence around the possibility for deeply democratized organizational forms, which we see as being fully consistent with where Stafford was coming from. And that did infuse the whole approach that we took to design here, even though a lot of it was pre-VSM, and Jane will talk about that in a bit more detail later on. So the paper that we published reports on what needs to be happening and the architecture of those activities, how they need to fit together. And the paper did not address the subsequent question of how to organize, but we did do some work on that, and we are going to take the story a little bit further on here for the benefit of this audience. So I was employed at the time by Transport for Greater Manchester, which is the regional transport authority covering the Greater Manchester area, population of about 3 million or so. The work was sparked by COVID, so the beginning of 2020. Hugely fluctuating demand in travel patterns because of COVID, which got everybody immediately understanding the interplay between different kinds of connectivity. So the flipping backwards and forwards between physical connectivity and virtual connectivity, which actually helped us in helping to structure a more holistic view of connectivity rather than just being focused on transport through this work. Strong funding challenges, ongoing funding challenges, as well as a whole set of new responsibilities for this organization. So it is landed with a level of responsibility for the implementation of the clean air zones. There is a big bus reform program coming down the track that you may have seen news about that. And then, I mean, more peripheral but ongoing changes in the way in which rail is organized, and various other things. I mean, an ongoing program of infrastructure development in cycling and walking across Greater Manchester, which TFGM strongly involved in as well. So I was involved in helping to structure a change program which included an aspirational piece. We called it, we gave these sort of continuous verbs. We call it the aspiring work stream, along with reshaping. So we were holding open the possibility that there may be a need to reshape the organization and its interactions in order to deal with these new responsibilities coming. And then, as well as that, in parallel, a focus on the ongoing process of continuous improvement. So the work that we reported here was part of the aspiring work stream that I was heavily involved with. And what Jane and I, the hour here is me and Jane, our strategy was to prototype a new approach to design, and recognizing that there were likely to be constructive tensions with the way in which things are currently done, but knowing that would happen, that would be a source of learning for us. I think we became increasingly articulate to ourselves about our personal preferences through all of this, and I've chosen to describe that as being iterative, involving deep and broad involvement from as many people as possible, and also taking an outside in approach, and recognizing that actually those three kind of ways of thinking really differed from those of the formal culture, which tends to favor linear kind of thinking, avoiding the too much complexity around deep and broad involvement if at all possible. And there is a tendency for inside out thinking, not always, but that is a bit of a tendency. And I mean, these are not unique findings. Most organizations tend to be locked into patterns of thinking like that. But we did see a deep match with the stated institutional intent for change, and the organization had picked up and was promoting a phrase, becoming future ready, or always future ready, which we saw as a way of describing the need to support the agility to cope with whatever, deal with whatever comes. And we also saw ourselves as participants in the system. I think so many people, particularly people who get involved in change, very often see themselves as outside the system being changed, and we were deeply aware that we were bringing our own hopes and biases and worldview with us as we went, and we've written about that in the paper. So the overall objectives lifted from the paper, demonstrating a rapid approach to prototyping, a vision which we needed to be responsible, co-designing a whole system architecture, which we'll talk about shortly, and laying the foundations for a transition strategy. So this is very much linked into the vision-led transport and connectivity strategy. So there's a well-developed regional transport vision and strategy, and we widened the scope to take in connectivity more generally, so digital connectivity as well here, and in the context of becoming always future ready. We set out to demonstrate the value of collaboration, bringing different viewpoints, different voices into the discussion as far as possible. And also, we recognize, the two of us, how difficult deep collaboration can be, and that actually that process of self-understanding and self-reflection is an inherent part of stepping into collaborative relationships. So we were holding that as a, recognizing the need for that and the likelihood of that happening through all of this. A number of people on reviewing the paper said, how did you do this? How did you create an environment in which this was wanted and was possible? And the editors of the paper picked up this sentence that we wrote. What we were doing was neither a solution to a specific problem, nor a solution looking for a problem, but an approach to collectively reframing the understanding of the whole situation to enable new questions to be asked, new opportunities to be found, and new ways of working to emerge. Now, that's not normally the kind of thing that gets sponsored and funded in most organizations, even though it's hugely valuable, as this audience will recognize, I think. And there were a couple of factors that enabled this work to be done, one of which was that I'd been around previously as a consultant in this organization, and I knew a lot of people at different levels in the organization, and built up a level of trust and confidence amongst that audience that even if people didn't always understand what I was doing, that I wasn't doing stupid things, and that usually it ended up having value, new insights. So there was a level of trust in those personal relationships, which was hugely helpful and essential. And then coupled with that, we had this established change program, which provided an umbrella and some legitimacy for exploring new ways of thinking. Finally, from me, before we get into more methodological detail, as I said before, this was about holding the possibility of transformation. I picked this up from the internet. It says, framing the landscape, many people look, but only a few see. I always think, well, we all see, it's just we see differently. So a critical element of what we were doing was exploring the choice of boundaries. How do we choose to distinguish this chunk of activity from that chunk of activity? And what's the nature of the interface between the two? So this is another quote from the paper. which was a summary really of the experience that a number of people had. So some people experienced a shift in perspective from an initial focus on me and my team to an appreciation of a wider complex system of activity. And the team, the individual roles that might be needed to make the system work. Some found this liberating and some found it really quite disconcerting. But it's that shift in perspective associated with the reimagining both the identity and the nature of boundaries, which underpins the potential for transformation. So all the way through this, certainly for me, holding the idea that the boundaries are interfaces, constructive, collaborative, co-creative interfaces of mutual learning and newness and real activity going on on all the boundaries is a fundamental part of the way in which this architectural work functions. Right, Jane, I think I'm handing over to you now.
Hope so.
There we go.
Okay, so the approach was based on, or it's aligned with Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes an existing model obsolete. So that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to build a model that created a pull by the future, rather than to look at the past and try and change something. And we wanted to do that by enabling agency for all the people that we could get to engage with it within the organization, and to give room for them to be able to co-create a future for the organization. I'm using the Three Horizons words today. They're a good way of describing these different states of things. And so starting with Horizon 3, which is the desired future, we were imagining a vision of how it would be in terms of the core activities that would be needed and the way that they could be collaborate together within the context of that future in order to produce the sort of organization, the whole system that people were looking for transport for Greater Manchester and for the overall connectivity. So starting by visioning, I'm just going to summarize the overall approach first, and then we'll come back to a bit more detail. So moving on from that to Horizon 1. So we weren't modeling what was going on today. We were taking the vision of the future and working out which bits of the organization would sensibly fit within that structure and were going today and would be useful for the future. But imagining them with today's context and the shape of the future. And moving on, so that would be the first horizon. The second horizon, which is about the context of the change and doing the change, would represent working out from within the first horizon what needed to be added to the model. And most of what needed to be added to such a model was always, of course, the collaborations, which were not there at the moment. But there would be expected to be other activities that were missing that would need to be generated in order to achieve that future vision. So that was the overall shape. Create a vision, decant current activities into it, use the pull of the future to move forward, where everyone could be working within their own areas to at the same time to actually change them and to move them towards the shared vision that they've all been part of creating. So that was the way that it was intended to work.
Moving on.
So there's some things that we were doing that aren't perhaps the usual way of going about things. We were not looking to redesign an organization. We were looking at the overall system. And so we were looking at what was the system in focus, what was its context, what was its purpose, and what would the scope be. And as we refined the purpose over a few iterations, the scope of the system in focus was changing. But this was normal as different people got involved and fed their ideas into what the purpose of the system might be. And all the lines on these diagrams represent the potential for co-creation. And the other thing that we did that is a bit unusual is we, as Roger said earlier, we put the public at the absolute center of the model, not in the environment. So it wasn't a model of a service delivered to an environment. It was a model where the public and the citizens of Manchester were absolutely at the heart of it. So we've then refined the system and its context and the co-creation between the system and its context to identify more and more detail, perhaps, around the sorts of activities that would need to exist in that future. And we zoomed into some details because we'd got the skills in at that time to actually look at them, and others we just left as blobs that would get looked at a later stage. So all sorts of different levels of zooming in and out, but remembering that we wanted to always keep these connections between things. And these were purposeful activities in context.
We on to step 3, Jane?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you. So the third step would have been this, and this is a little illustration of a Bible system model. So we've got, we're thinking that all of these activities could be pulled together and made part of and need their own organising, as one would if one was introducing Bible system model. But we haven't got a single stat because we're talking about a whole system that might cover many organisations and the public. So, but identifying where those nodes of organising in a design state. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is just a sort of a schematic of the design that we went for in the end. And Roger will be talking about this a bit more in detail later. So on the left, we've got living life as citizens and living life as communities. On the right, we had providing infrastructure, then providing services, and then a completely new branch of organisation, which was matching needs and services to bring the public and the service providers together into a single piece of organisation, which would be working to match the needs and the services. So that was a vision as a design. And then the next step, had we gone anywhere near this, would have been to have taken individual pieces of this that were appropriate given the sponsorship from organisations that we had, and looked at how they might see it as a system in focus, and putting all the other bits of the system into their context so that they each would have their own view and could design their own operating model within that scope of the overall system. And if we'd ever got there, we would have then wondered how we might decant current organisation activities into this structure to align the evolving organisation with its visionary purposes and to enable all to convene the new system, making changes in line with the shared vision. And I'm using the word convene as in the work of Etienne and Bev. Yeah, Ben Trainer, yes, who talk about systems convening and have written a book about it, which describes very well the sort of activity that is required in order to make small steps forward from the changed organizational structure towards the future vision, where everyone gets involved in actually working out how they can make their system work.
Great.
Okay. So I'm now just going to describe not in terms of the detailed model that we produced, which we had in a tool called Archie, but some just diagrammatic versions of what this transition architecture looked like. So again, we're guided by a quote here: model is neither true nor false, it's more or less useful. And we were determined that our model here wasn't the only one we could have drawn, but we thought that we were actually creating something that would be really useful, because it was reflecting the views of all the people who'd engaged with it and the vocabulary that they had developed to use for it, so that they would be in a good position to discuss with each other using the same vocabulary, the same sorts of activities when they came to move it forward. So at the top level, this is what we ended up with: a purpose. It was living lives enabled by connectivity, transport and digital for Greater Manchester. And that lived in the evolving context in which these connections would happen. And so the first step of refining it was we had two activities. One was living and thriving in Greater Manchester, and one was connecting people, community and places. And the public were absolutely vital to both of those, because they were doing the connecting and they were living and thriving in Greater Manchester. And all of that was happening in the broad context of their lives. And then you will see that there is a line between those, and therefore that's an opportunity for collaborative behaviour. And we discovered that at the real heart of this model was choosing how to connect, which was a collaborative behaviour between the people of Manchester and their service and the actual services that were available, where they would find out all about information that they needed in order to make this key decision of how they were going to connect. And that we found that there was connections happening. These choices were being made at different granularities. There was, where shall we live? What are the connection opportunities in a particular place? Is it good to live there or somewhere else? If we do live here, what are the options if I want to go to work every day, or if I want to go on a one-off journey? And all of those need to be informed by all the things in the context, like the natural environment, pollution, etc., etc. And so the matching service would be offering information to citizens to help them to make decisions about how they were going to choose to connect.
Bring these other.
Mm-hmm. So bringing on those bits, we've got protecting the natural environment being key to choosing how to connect. We've got developing the urban form, which is where people live, with respect to connectivity. And we decided to bring all of these, and including the energy, into the system in focus, because all of these three activities are absolutely vital to choosing how to connect. And the rest, and they would interact. And so these are the collaborative activities sitting on the edge of the system in focus and connecting with the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really just a high-level overview of the architecture, and everyone would be able to imagine their own version of this. So they would tell their own stories about what they saw in the architecture. And so to illustrate, I'll just tell a story of my own. When I was living in Leek in Staffordshire, the company that I worked for wanted me to move to Manchester and to start working from Manchester instead of near a home at Kisgrove. And so I was wondering what I should do. And I was looking at, should I move to Manchester, which was actually led me to trying to find out where I could live in Manchester, where the urban areas were, etc., and what sort of connectivity they had. But in the end, I decided, no, I wouldn't move to Manchester. I'd just try and work out how I could commute. So I was looking to how do I actually travel there every day, because home working in those days wasn't an option. And I found that there weren't any buses, because it was the nearest station was Macclesfield, and that was across a county boundary. So of course you couldn't have buses going between the two of them. And that was, so I ended up having to drive to Macclesfield, catch a train to Manchester, and then walk a couple of miles to where I was working, which was fine. But it probably wasn't a good way, as good a way as it might be. So I might imagine how these various elements of this might happen in the future. So I'm still probably going to decide I'm going to stay in Leek, but I'm probably working from home 4 days a week and using an online connection rather than traveling. I'm staying where I am, so that's the urban form. I'm looking at how I can do this in an environmentally friendly way. So I'm hoping that by then I'm going to get electric buses to the station at lots of convenient times, that there'll be electric trains into Manchester, all running on renewable electricity. And I'll be able to perhaps pick up a bike at the station and cycle the last bit. And so I might imagine how that might change in the future, and how that architecture is illustrating those journeys, and how I would choose to connect overall. So that's my story, but I could actually tell it from the viewpoint of a bus driver. So if I'm a bus driver, I might be in the depot, co-visioning with my colleagues on a regular basis about how are we going to actually run our bus service to make it better. And we would work together to co-create changes in the way we were working. We would have the agency to make those changes and to learn about what we were doing, and therefore be able to feed back improvements as we went. And we'd also be developing our potential as individuals, because we'd be thinking about, on a much broader scale, about how we might change the organisation, and can help each other to develop our skills in doing this. So, you know, that's just a couple of illustrations of how the architecture could be told as stories by different people within the organisation. So the quote, Roger? Oh, thank you. One of the people who was working with us was the manager of a multinodal interchange node in Manchester, with trains and buses and trams and things. And he looked at it and said, well, once you've got this, you can get future ready, reference to change programme there, by thinking about how to organise things. Hence the VSM came into the picture. And we were really pleased that he had seen this coming. So this is just a bit we've put into this for this particular audience, because I thought you might be, and it's a bit of technical detail, but I thought you might be interested in how we went from the overall process-oriented system design model of the system into the viable system model. So the method was to reflect the architecture in the viable system model-based design. And as I say, Roger will talk about that a bit more in a minute. Narrow the scope to the portion of the system relevant to the organisation in focus, with the rest of the system in the VSM environment. Then we mapped the ground level activities in the model that we had into the emerging viable system model environment, and their interactions were taken with them into that structure. So they didn't lose their interactions and become siloed again. They kept their interactions between activities at the system one level. And then grouped those system ones into new design components, based on the way that we were seeing the design working, and use the organizing principles of VSM in terms of variety balances and recursions and things like that to actually come up with something that seemed more like a practical design. And for every one of S1 component that we found, we just created an extra activity in the POSD notation, which was organizing it. And that was what we did. So the key things here were we were using the viable system model in design mode rather than analysis mode. We can represent the viable system model in the process-oriented system design notation. And in POSD, but we have to remember that in the POSD notation, there is no such thing as instances, they're just general activities. So we now had to think in terms of instances because we were going much nearer the ground with the viable system model. And the other thing about POSD is we keep a distinction between the roles that do activities, the human and the activities themselves. But what we don't do is introduce that until we've absolutely got down to a ground level. So as we decompose the POSD model, we aim to create human-shaped activities that can then be attached to a particular type of role that is appropriate to doing that type of activity. And as we've said before, the overall system design model is viewed as multiple mutually interacting viable system recursions. And you need to, at this stage, of course, to introduce detailed design data in order to worry about variety and these sorts of issues that come with that more detailed design. And so we weren't going straight into VSM with a problem. We were actually creating a space for transformation before thinking about the viable system model. And that was the method.
Which we can talk about again in a bit. Great, thanks, Jane. So I want to just give you a little bit more detail, not a huge amount actually here, but a little bit more detail on the shift in practice then from that overall architecture. Obviously, all you've seen is very high level, but there's a lot more detail, model detail, down to the ground, if you like, down to, in some cases, individual level. And so this is the next step on the process to structuring that to be ready for the organizing layer. So at the heart of this is living life, living my life, living our lives in community. We've had running organizations in here to just point to the fact that these are, there may be a whole range of different types of organized activity going on in people's lives in the context of Greater Manchester, and then the organized system in focus, which we chose from the whole landscape, then was enabling journeys of people and goods to meet a variety of needs, which you might label as with the thing like label the Greater Manchester transport system. And obviously there's a big interface between those two. So when what we were doing was laying the groundwork to thinking about how that system could then be organized. And we went through a process of thinking about this in all sorts of different directions. I was very locked into thinking about it in modal terms because, i.e., trains, trams, airways, waterways, roads, etc., different modes of transport, because that's the way the thing is currently organized, despite the visionary direction of travel to seamless as well as sustainable and fully inclusive journeys across the region. And we thrashed around thinking about this in various different ways, and in a flash of design inspiration, really it was Jane articulated this as a combination of these three interacting VSM stacks of matching customer needs with transport services. I'm not showing this detail here for simplicity, but this is where we arrived at: providing transport services and then providing integrated transport network infrastructure in an integrated way. So, and then on the line between living and, oh no, sorry, I haven't got there yet. This is popping up in a different way. And then there's other elements of the original architecture, which then become part of the context of that organized system in focus. So enabling connectivity through telecom services, which is also playing into other aspects of other ways of connecting in people's daily lives. The whole complex process of developing the urban form. So in practical terms, that's the interplay between, for example, land use planning and transport planning at a sort of front end strategic level, and all the the interactions, the interplay between where people live, where they work, where they want to move to, and where they live, which is it's a big issue in terms of organizing all of that on that interface. On the collaborative space here between living and the transport system, the processes of enabling journeys are the collaborative activities of engaging on how to connect, which is what we saw. That's enabling, that's a collaborative process enabling that, choosing people and organizations to choose connectivity options, and then a whole range of other collaborative interaction between citizens and service providers over multiple timescales. Some of the things that Jane was pointing to earlier on, which includes making journeys themselves, which is a collaborative activity ultimately, and engaging on the details of making specific journeys. And then, I don't know, you could imagine citizen forums to be playing into decisions about longer term decisions about transport infrastructure and those kinds of things. Other aspects of the context of this organized system in focus include the provision of energy, which is absolutely critical and increasingly critical in the context of a desire to move to a net zero carbon position as rapidly as possible, and transport is a major contributor to carbon emissions, as you probably know. And then there's a wider context, wider elements of the context, including the natural environment. So this way of thinking, I know, again, we've not given you loads of detail, but this way of thinking about how to structure and organize a fully integrated transport system would, of course, then have implications for the governance and organization of the system at regional level. So we took this far with some detail under here, as a prototype of enabling people to think in different ways, really. I think John alluded to this at the beginning, that we see designing, this was just, we wanted to keep this slide in, designing is enabling everyone to be both choreographers and dancers. And I think both Jane and I have a strong sense that our design systems do not optimally serve the best interests of all people and life in general, and that we can change, human beings can change what human beings have designed. It may not be easy, but we need to hold on to that faith, if you like. So a couple of slides finally, and then we'll get on to discussion questions. We drew a distinction. So this is in an organizational, taking an organizational perspective. We drew a distinction between formal structures and informal networks. So we were very struck inside this organization that it feels like people are kind of have one foot in an informal culture and another foot in a formal culture, and they feel very different. And it was very useful actually to be able to tap into people's kind of natural inclinations to socially interact with one another, with a view to understanding and shifting the bigger picture to improve it as far as was possible. But we did become very aware that drawing that kind of distinction does run the risk of orienting around rather than allowing transformation of the existing formal approach to organization and governance. So we sort of left that just as a risk to be aware of in this kind of process. And then this is just a bullet on the inevitable map territory confusions that arise when people try and build any kind of models of anything. No model can ever claim to be comprehensive, but there's always a danger that this looks like it's a claim to comprehensiveness here. I was very influenced by Roger Harnden, who used to write in some depth about Stafford's work, and he talked about the distinction between modeling processes which are descriptive or prescriptive or generative. And I think I absorbed from him the sense that modeling is a generative exercise which enables human beings to coordinate their thinking and action with one another. And I think that kind of sense of what modeling is or can be infuses what we've done here. So what? So at one level, a lot of people, most of the people who are involved in this, that they learned things they weren't expecting to, which you can never set up as a learning objective really in these kinds of processes, because you don't know what insights are going to arise, but it really does or can shift perspective pretty rapidly actually, and in a way that sometimes, as I said earlier on, is disconcerting or destabilizing, but sometimes, particularly I'd say for people working in the thick of the operational frontline, whatever, living lives, kind of it feels really quite liberating to get insights into a bigger picture and then come back to understand, okay, so how do I and we play roles in this overall complex system of activity? We, as we've alluded to here, we've already used the transition architecture to explore a potential structure for a fully integrated regional transport system and outline possible adaptive and distributed governance and organizational arrangements based on the VSM, which are designed to accommodate ongoing emergent change. And we didn't explicitly show that to you here, but you might imagine how that would start to develop in terms of we didn't go a huge distance on it, but we did start to think about the recursive structure that would be appropriate to absorb the kind of variety that we imagine exists in this system. Then in practice, growth of informal networks could influence the future design of different formal structural and organizational arrangements, could reinforce a collaborative culture. We hold out the possibility of this deeply democratized, distributed authority, mutual learning, holistic development. But can't predict the details. Don't underestimate the challenge of existing patterns of doing things. But I think the world is feeling much more open to trying new ways of doing things to me. So I remain hopeful. We remain hopeful here. Finally, there's a link to the paper should you wish to read more. And I'd be delighted to have a discussion now. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. That's fascinating. Okay, we have hands up already. I think you're first, Jens.
It's clapping.
What was that?
It was not a fun.
A lot
That
of
was a
fun.
clap. Oh, excuse me.
Well, that's great.
Have you got a
I mean,
question?
actually, I saw Penny clapping silently in the background as well. Well, that's very kind.
Okay, Ian, you got a question?
On mute. I'm off mute now. There we go. Thanks, Jane and Roger. That was really interesting. You mentioned POSD. Now, I've got a shared background, so I know what POSD is, but I think it's a highly significant thing that may not be familiar. Everybody here may not be familiar with it. So perhaps if you could explore that for a minute, that might be helpful.
Right, it's something I've been using for many years. It was developed by somebody called Graham Pratton, and is very simple notation. It just identifies activities and shared behavior between activities. So it's a good way of mapping a system when you don't want to get into flow type thinking and trying to work out what happens first, because every line on a POSD model has the potential for two-way interaction. Because every line equals a conversation or a shared activity or a piece of collaboration or co-creation. So the lines become more important usually in a POSD model than the initial activities that actually frame it. And all you do is look inside the lines and find new collaborative activities there and stretch out the model to actually put more detail in, because you're understanding now what needs to go on the lines, and they become activities in their own right. So that's the way of modeling. And the only other thing that we do with it is to say, okay, once you've got it to a level of human-shaped activities in some of the bits that you actually want to look at, you can identify some types of role that would actually do that. So it's got a, not only is it a piece of design work, it's now actually connecting people's job roles to the sorts of activities they will actually do. So you've got the basis for doing a piece of implementation as soon as you've got it to that sort of level. But you want to be really careful that you don't, as I say, don't design the life out of the system by trying to go too detailed with it. It's very much a system of overviews, and you might actually identify the key areas that a particular organization would take responsibility for, rather than the details of what a particular analyst does. So that's the sort of feel for the level. Is that okay, Ian?
Okay, Stephen, you got a question in the chat. Do you want to ask it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thanks for the answer to the previous question, Jane. So Roger or Jane, I don't know, either one of you. I love the fact that you put the residents of the community into the center of the model. And I love the fact that you de-identified for many of the organizations that were serving the needs of those people at the center of the model. It seems to me that this is, you know, and you made reference to, I think, to the phrase whole community system or whole community design. I don't know, maybe not. I could be making that up.
That's cool though, if you heard that.
Well, I do inject things in, so apologies if that's not what you're saying. Anyway, what I'm looking for, I'm wondering, you know, in your research or in your survey or in your environmental scan, did you come across anything like a reference model for a community, a resident-centric or resident needs-centric model of community?
Yeah.
I see Jane smiling.
Well, many years ago, I did a piece of work which was called the Circle of Need, and I used POSD to actually identify what were the needs of citizens and how would they interact with each other. So I did that with a whole set of local authorities and the regional authorities, etc. But that's the only model that I know of that. But there may be other things.
I would say, Jane, more recently, a couple of years ago, Jane and I were developing thinking around community well-being with application to actually where Jane lives in Scotland now. Now this grew out of some work that International Futures Forum, a charity, had been doing in Scotland for a number of years, or been involved in, very much in health and social care, but very much from the supply side, if you like, working out how to get more involved with supporting elderly people with complex needs in their own homes, for example, and recognizing that need to move into, if you like, into citizen world. And the work that, well, I thought Jane's brilliant move, we started talking about governance in that kind of context of integrated health and social care, and what we were trying to do was put the citizen, human being living their lives, in the middle of this picture. And I thought Jane's brilliant move was to say, let's focus on the relational space between person living life and all influences, all other influences around them, and think about how we might, if you like, organize elements of that relational space. So the model that I was carrying in my mind, I mean, whether I would describe it in quite the same way as you, Jane, I don't know, but is starting from a focus on that relational space, or the shared behavior in Jane's language, or the constitutive relationship, if you wanted to be a bit more technical about it, and the certainly using POS-D notation enables that focus on the interactive, the relational spaces always. I'm probably dodging your question, but that's in simple terms, that's what I'm holding. And interesting, a particular example of that was one of the drill downs that we did here, which was stimulated by some people that we were coaching in the methodology, was started out a couple of people saying, we've got a real issue with antisocial behavior, we'd like to investigate that, can you help us think about that? And it developed into a system in focus that they labeled traveling without fear. So it's very much writing it from the perspective of people using public transport. And when we got into thinking about all the activities that go on inside traveling out without fear, we ended up using this sort of similar kind of blueprint of, again, thinking about people-shaped roles, people-shaped activities. There's stuff that people in uniform do, service providers do. There are things that people do when they're traveling. And then in the context of traveling without fear, there's an interactive set of real activities in there, which are about establishing and maintaining the social tone in, places like interchanges or on public transport. And that a number of the people who are involved operationally were kind of saying, well, yeah, that's exactly right, that co-created space which establishes the cultural environment is absolutely critical, and everybody's involved in it, and people have different roles in that space. So I guess that same patterning was there.
I'll close just by saying I really loved the fact that Jane identified this matching of needs to services as the central portion of the model, and the acknowledgement that when you bring service dominant logic to bear, that is the co-creation of value in that moment of actually using the transportation service to get to where I want to. So thanks very much for a really good talk today. It's been great.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I have a question. Oh, no, I'll let you, was that you, Hugh? Were you just waving or?
Yeah, I've got questions, but if you want to go first, that's fine.
Okay, it's really a general question that I'm finding more and more discussing the stuff that I've been talking about, mainly coming from Stafford over many decades, that it feels that people are much more open to them now. And there's a real sense that something quite fundamental is shifting. And Ian and I were having a conversation earlier in the week about what's called the Kairos moment in Greek philosophy. Is that right, Ian? Which is a fundamental shift in values and understanding and paradigms, which opens the opportunity for significant change. And it sort of feels that we're moving towards one of those. And in a number of contexts, ideas which I'd expected people to either just look bemused or aggressive about, and now seem to be quite acceptable. I just wondered if, well, first of all, if you'd found that, and if that opened new avenues for you to develop your ideas and do stuff that you wouldn't have been able to do maybe 10 years ago.
Yes, what? Sorry, Roger.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I guess what I'm feeling is that there are significant issues with the acceptability of the sort of thinking that we're doing, because it's going in the face of the power hierarchies that exist. But maybe I'm hopeful that these problems are just to do with the fact that these ideas are so new to people and therefore very difficult to assimilate initially, because we're changing all the assumptions that are going on. And maybe if we can actually get enough people picking up on this and using it in different circumstances, these things will become much more acceptable to people. And then we'll find ways of actually moving in a relatively comfortable way from the way that they're organized today to a way that they might be organized in the future, one step at a time.
So my answer was going to be yes and no. I think there is a much more widespread use of some of the language. So, I mean, public sector organizations will release invitations to tender which ask for support in system change, systems leadership, systemic transformation. But the extent to which that's just a set of buzzwords, actually, when you get to the point of doing it deeply, it's really quite destabilizing to establish established worldviews, a lot of this. Somebody,
so much to give.
I didn't particularly use the term system. Somebody told me you can't call this a systemic architecture because the word systemic is associated with failure, so we can't have that. So you need to call it something else. So we called it an activity architecture. But which is just a marketing issue, really, to stop scaring people. And then if you use the term systems, it sounds like it's to do with IT and they're out there and all those kind of problems. But I think there's I think the yes piece, that was the no piece. The yes piece is a lot of people are running out, recognize that there are converging challenges all over the world. A lot of people through the process of COVID and now what's going on, with the rippling out from what's going on in Ukraine or whatever, that more and more people are living the deep interconnectedness and what become converging crises if you're not careful, and are therefore much more open to, do we really have processes and ways of addressing the complexity in new ways? And I've always, when I first started talking to Jane, more than 10 years ago, now. We met through SIO. I just thought lots and lots of people talk about this, but I'm not sure I've ever met anybody who really has methodologies that can get to grips with it. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Hugh, you had a question, and then Elena's got a hand up.
Okay, thank you. My interpretation of what you've presented here is a kind of a qualitative research then that's you're trying to funnel into make, put some structure and organization on. I'm not, and it seems to me that the examples you presented gave some indication about, I assume you went around asking people or getting information from people about what their visions are. One of the first things that strikes me here is that there's such a depth of dimension in terms of how far one takes one's visioning in the first place. So how did you approach that?
So I would say we had a good starting point in terms of, so Transport for Greater Manchester has a group which develops transport strategy for the region. So not for the organization, but transport in the round for the region. And therefore there is there are a set of professionals who spend their lives thinking outside of an organizational box about the interconnectedness of the whole system. So we kind of had a bunch of people who could think in those terms, could think outside the modal boxes, could understand, just have an intuitive sense of the complexity of what they're dealing with, I guess. We brought our own viewpoints to bear here, particularly putting citizens at the heart, the lives of everybody at the heart of this. That was a piece that we imported, and when we started sprinkling that in to begin with, and it was all all of this work was done online because it was during COVID, which was not great, but we managed it somehow. Would much prefer to be doing it in person, but in general we had small groups of people to discuss various different aspects of the architecture, and we built, we presented things, worked on it together, refined the wording in particular, refined the structure, explored collaborative interfaces, and gradually just continued to push the boundaries, if you like, to see where people would move to in terms of having a more expansive viewpoint. So things like having our system in focus being around connectivity rather than just transport, was actually pretty easy to do because of COVID.
Can I interject with an example?
Sure, yeah.
So if you were asking me, right, about as a member of public about what I could be visioning, I think first of all I might just start be thinking about small changes in terms of what's currently presented. Okay, or it'd be nice if the bus arrives on time, or things like that. But actually, if you first of all, you've got to give me an indication of to free myself up.
How far can I go?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to just be flown to where I want to be and just get there as quick as, or so then that in itself needs to be mapped onto what is actually feasible and possible. And if you're talking with people who are already in the system, then they're going to have some intuitions about what is reasonable and what isn't. But if you're interested in the well-being and the lived experiences of people, there's other nuances. And I was thinking in terms of, for example, the kind of questions that Christopher Alexander used to ask about what has more life in certain situations. So I can, for example, when there's a small section of A road that I need to walk along when I need to take my dog up into some woods. Okay, And at different times of day, or depending upon the drivers on that road, there's a huge difference between the life and, if cars are driving, if there's not too many cars driving along that road and there's somewhere between 20 and 30 miles an hour, I can still hear the birds in the trees. When there's lorries roaring by at 40 miles an hour, which is 10 miles over the limit at that point, it's very different. And when you've got someone who's just putting their foot down at 50, then it's not a nice experience at all. Okay, especially when it's on narrow pavement. Now, even in that context, you could think about, well, I could say, yeah, I can think about the degrees of life that I experience just in that moment. And likewise, you could say, well, getting on a bus and other things, it's not necessarily about getting somewhere as quickly as possible, or getting somewhere without being harassed, or getting somewhere where you're not getting jostled or anything else. You might think about, well, actually, if this is a situation, and you were just blue sky thinking, you might think, well, it's an opportunity for an encounter. Perhaps you're going to sit down and have a talk with someone, and you might meet someone in a particular circumstance. So there's all sorts of rich dimensions that you can bring into it. And I don't know whether this is the sort of thing you were thinking about.
I feel like you're going to answer this one, Jane.
No. You carry on, Roger. I guess, all right. I'm seeing that the experiment, when we asked people to choose an example of their own and do some work on it, was of traveling without fear, was an example of actually looking at the quality of life and the quality of life that you get when you're traveling. And we were, unfortunately, because we were doing a prototype and we were just trying to prove out our case and our method, we weren't unable to actually involve real citizens, only people inside the organizations, asking them to put on their citizens' hats, if you like. So, we didn't get too much experience during this initial case study of doing that.
So what I was going to say, and where I thought you'd go, Jane, is that well, what was coming up for me when you were talking there, Hugh, is absolutely at the heart of what we were thinking about was to create a systemic structure which would have spaces in which all of those things that you've just been talking about can be properly explored and held, so you don't get, so it's not, so that the explosive variety of all of those different options is able to be held and channel the voices that need to be heard. Because the way that things tend to be structured at the moment is, all right, we have consultation processes and whatever, but it does tend to be in any of these sort of industrialized kind of setups, the focus tends to be too strongly on the expert design side and not strongly enough on the real kind of explorative input from people with, to use the horrible phrase, lived experience, as if we don't all have lived experience. But anyway, the detail that you're talking about there would not appear at the kind of level of the architectural visioning that we were talking about here, but the ability to have those conversations and impact what happens is absolutely a principle that needs to be captured in the way in which we were visioning. Does that do it, Jane?
I think so. We hope that the architecture holds the space for these conversations to happen between all sorts of people in all sorts of situations, and that there is, as a result of that, they will develop common vocabulary that will enable them to interact together and to work out how it ought to work in the particular contexts that they are living in, be it your own neighborhood or your own organization or whatever.
Okay, thank you. Elena.
Hi, well, thank you for an interesting thing. And I think you might have answered part of my question already, because I was going to ask you about the stakeholders and how you got information from them. But I also wanted to ask you if traveling without confusion and traveling without hassle came up. Because, you know, I've been traveling around a lot and I'm proposing to be traveling to Metaforum. Well, actually, I've got my ticket. But arriving in a new place and trying to figure your way around by public transport is sometimes quite a challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Even in Britain and, you know, other English speaking venues, it's sometimes very difficult to figure out where you're supposed to go, and why does this train station have 4 exits and you have no idea which is the one that you should take.
Yeah.
Sure. So certainly ease, simplicity, and seamlessness as well is through integration between different modes of transport at all levels is absolutely core to the strategic direction of travel in transport in Greater Manchester. Now, it remains easier said than done to actually achieve it, but it's certainly possible, and there are, you know, good examples from around the world of, I mean, I was astonished going to Germany a few years ago, being able to buy a ticket from, you know, one tiny little place to another tiny little place, and the same ticket then took me, you know, from bus to tram to train to tram to bus, and it all seemed to link up in terms of the timetables and everything, which is I guess an integrated process in action there. So yeah, I'm not sure we kind of had it explicitly.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, sure,
Because
Jane. Yeah,
I think the whole idea of having in the design a set of recursions that are going right to the top of the organization, that are based on matching need and services, was to create independence of that service. So instead of having a help desk, which is an offshoot of the service provider organization, there was an organization that was truly sitting between the citizen and the organization, and where a whole stack of volunteers from different parts of society would come together with a group of people that had access to the understanding of what was possible, and would be able to therefore commission the services to actually join together through their understanding of what people were saying to them. So that was the design thinking behind creating that particular set of recursions as a VSM that went right to the top of the organization.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Here in Toronto, there is a Toronto Transit Commission Riders Association that basically, you know, has hundreds of members, and their mission is to basically get politicians to listen to complaints that they hear from the people who actually use the system. You know, and they have to do with as nitty gritty as you can get, like only allowing 3 baby carriages on a bus, because otherwise there's not enough room for the rest of the passengers. And it comes really down to that kind of, you know, matching services with needs. That get very nitty gritty.
Yeah, and our view was that what used to be a help desk and seen as a very sort of mechanical sort of job, would be the most powerful role in the organization, and would be all the individual people involved in answering those phone calls would be gathering intelligence about what's actually happening out there and the quality of the services and what people are experiencing, and therefore best placed to define that, to use that intelligence, gather it together and use it for commissioning the services that people wanted.
Yeah, I think that's important, but my own experience of using the help desk is it's necessary mainly under breakdown conditions, where your train has been canceled, or, you know, something else has happened and it's thrown the system as it's stated into turmoil.
So I guess I'm seeing the help desk as growing a whole stack of System 4 capability, and being able to use the information about, say, what sort of power is being used whether it's renewable or not, etc., to help people to make a decision whether to catch this particular train or this train. You know, and to be normal, to be able to come back to that person and say, I'm not really sure about this. I've got another problem. Can you tell me what is the difference between doing this and doing that? So that they're not there just for emergencies, but they're really actually the front end of the system for capability for the organization.
That makes sense. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
I would just like to say as well that Jane talks about the organization. And I think, you know, one of the, this is an organized chunk of activity. And, you know, we always kind of got, because of where we started here, we were reimagining the boundaries of existing organizations. And although we can kind of talk about it as the organization, it's it's an organized set of activities, and quite how that ends up being constituted in, you know, organizations with particular names in future would be subject to.
Yeah, we just, for sake of simplicity, had an integrating node at the top. An integrating recursion, if you like.
Okay, well, we're rapidly coming to the end. Any final questions from anybody? Ian?
Just a quick one. I remember, 20 years ago now, more than 20 years ago now, when you introduced me to role interaction modeling, Jane. The notion of process-oriented systems design, where a process is a set of roles that interact to achieve a state change. And that role interaction modeling to me was very, very significant and has stayed with me. I just wondered how much you've used that thinking in the work you're doing now.
I think that the role interaction modeling is now, I see, as seamless with the POSD stuff.
Yeah.
It's just the nearer the ground bit.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks ever so much. That was wonderful talk. Enjoyed it very much. And what I'd be interested to see is maybe he's come back to this in a few years' time and see how many of the dancers have become choreographers and what has actually changed. I think that'd be great. So thanks ever so much.
Thank you so much for making this possible, and thank you for all the engagement. It was great.
Yeah, well,
thank you, everyone.
And the next event is the conference in Leuven, and there's a few people here going to come to that. So looking forward to that very much indeed. And then we'll regroup later on in the summer and start a whole new set of webinars. Okay.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.